Welcome to One Old Man's Opinion, episode 15. I'm the old man. Today I'm going to relate a little story that happened to me a few years ago, and then I'll talk about one of the more popular scriptures that I think we can maybe get an extra squeeze or two out of. Many years ago, at least 15, maybe more, it was Christmas shopping season, and I was out with Mrs. Old Man and Mrs. Old Man's sister. And they we got into a big box store, and they managed to find somehow, goodness knows how, they found the shoe department. And they were checking out the shoe department. And so I, being not quite as enthusiastic about it as they were, I wandered off. And I came across a woman and what I think was her sister and her child. Her kid was riding in a shopping cart, and he was giving her a hard time, a real hard time. She was at her wit's end. He was screaming at her and reaching out and grabbing things and flapping his arms and becoming very difficult. I heard her call him by name a time or two, and I went over and I leaned over close to this kid. I don't remember his name, so I'll call him Johnny. I said, "Johnny." And he looks at me like, "Who the heck are you?" You know. And she kind of looks at me like, "Whoa, what do you think you're doing?" And I said, "You did know that Santa was a cowboy, right?" And I had on my Stetson, one of my nice ones, and the whole banana, you know, pointy-toed boots, big buckle. And the kid goes, he didn't really know what to say. And I said, "I'd really like for you to be nice to your mama. Could you do that for me?" And he's, yeah. I said, "Yeah, thanks, you know." So then I stood up and I smiled at Mama and said, "Merry Christmas," and walked away. And I kind of spied on him from a distance, and that little kid was the sweetest little boy all the way out of the store. It illustrates it illustrates a need that we have going on in this country right now. No application of this particular mom and child and whatnot. Who knows what the rest of the family was like, or you know, whether or not he had siblings, whether or not he had a dad at home, whatever. But what every child needs, besides a loving, caring mom, is a stable, reliable, adult, male authority figure in the house. A dad or an uncle. In a pinch, a big brother. Someone a child can look up to and get some good old-fashioned toxic masculinity from. Toxic masculinity. Someone that that child can look up to. Someone who can teach that child. If it's a boy, then you know that he needs to be taught how to be a man. Not a soy boy or a woke wussy or a bully, but a man. And if it's a girl, it's to experience a man who cares about his spouse and his family and understand what she should be looking for in a life's partner. It's all children have it better off if there's a good man in the house. And we have had way too much in this society, growing problem of a shortage of dads. it's tragic because it's damaging our children. And they're turning around and damaging their children because they don't know. They don't have an example to go by. How are they going to teach? How are they going to be an example if they don't grow up with a good example? And of course, the families that, there's an old saying, the family that prays together stays together. That's not a joke. It's not just a slogan. If the family gets it all together, let's say on Sunday, and they all go to church, and the kids go to Sunday school until they grow up and become big enough to get into the sanctuary with everybody else and blah, blah, blah. That helps. That helps a lot. Well, that's just one old man's opinion. There's a popular scripture, Matthew 17:19 through 20, I think it is. I was just looking at it. Should be able to remember that. My short-term memory is not too good. In fact, it's been that way all my whole life. If I ever get Alzheimer's, nobody will know. Anyway. Took a note or two. Picked up the wrong book. Pretty good. Pretty good. Yep. Picked up the wrong book. Now here, I'll get my Magic Electronical book. And Matthew 17, and I'll back up a little bit before verse 19, and give you a little bit of context. When they came to the crowd, a man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him and saying, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and is very ill, for he often falls into the fire and often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him." And Jesus answered and said, "You unbelieving and perverted generation." I think he's talking to his disciples. "How long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why couldn't we drive it out? Why could we not drive it out?" And he said to them, "Because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. But this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting." That's from the NASB 1995 translation. There's nothing in the Greek that says size. And yet most of the later translations refer to the faith the size of a mustard seed. In the Greek, it says the faith as a mustard seed, implying to me more than just size. So let's see, this is Interlinear New Testament. Okay, yeah. So the literal translation, word for word literal translation is, "And Jesus said to them, because of unbelief, your unbelief, for verily I say to you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say blah blah, etc." Okay, And the word translated as has a Strong's number of 5613. So I looked that up, and I don't read, speak, or write Koine Greek, so for me this is super slow. But I look in my trusty Greek-English lexicon of the New Testament for 5613, and it says adverbial form of the relative pronoun, which is used in comparison as, like, as, even as, according as, in the same manner as, etc. Just like, for example, like a mustard seed, not as big as a mustard seed, but like a mustard seed. So what does that mean? Well, size is part of it. Mustard seed's not big. So that led me to look up some other things. Mustard is a weed. Although it's cultivated in some places, it's basically a weed. It grows wherever it happens. And especially the kind that they tended to have in the Middle East back in the 1st century, which is black mustard. The seeds are black. They're not yellow. So you grind it up, you don't get a nice yellow paste. You get something a little darker. And it's hardy. It'll grow in places where there isn't very much water. It'll grow in thin soil. It'll grow where it's physically abused, ripped up, torn out, it's tough. It's a weed. And it will grow big. And there are the references to it in Scripture about it being big enough for birds to nest in. It'll grow 4, 5, 6 feet tall if it has good conditions. But I think that's part of the meaning here. Is we're not just talking about having some faith. We're talking about having some faith that doesn't give up. Having some faith that perseveres. That shrugs off adversity, that just keeps going. And I think that's more meaning than what we typically see in a translation these days. Now I was able to find, these days online you can find anything you want, and I found many translations. Most of the newer ones say size. A lot of the older ones, especially the ones that were derived from the King James, say as. And I found one that says like. So it's not just my idea. I think I found a mistranslation. Wow. When you're trying to get when you're trying to get more meaning out of Scripture than just what's on the surface, you have some things to consider. And Scripture almost always has more than just what's on the surface. There are layers of meaning. Scripture now there's about 400,000 words in the King James. I don't know about any of the newer translations. And those 400,000 words are a complete manual from start to end of life, how to live. And it's a history book. And it's examples of how things are supposed to go and how things went wrong. And the list goes on. If you want to understand it, some of the things you have to understand are involved in context. Who received the message? To whom was it written? Who emitted the message? Who wrote it down? What was the societal norm in those days? What was the meaning of the words in those days? What was typical behavior, belief, understanding? For example, start at the very beginning, go back to Genesis. The first few chapters of Genesis look like somebody sat down and stitched together 3 stories. Well, they probably did, because until Moses came along and had it recorded, it was passed on by word of mouth. And so, a bunch of people would get the message, and then they would move away for a while, and they'd come back, and the message would go from person to person to person to person to person, and it would drift. No effort was made, no formal effort was made to preserve the exact wording. And so it would drift. Oh, well, Moses either was told or figured out for himself that this is not how it needs to be. We need to get this as distilled down to the original as we can make it, and we need to make sure that there's a system in place to keep it that way. And they did. When they did the scribes, every time the scribes would do a new scroll, they'd copy scroll to scroll. They would count all the letters in a line. They would count the words in a line. They would make notes in the margins, and they did all kinds of things to make sure that the copy was the same as the original. But in the early days, in Genesis, and whatever thing that came before Moses, they didn't have that system in place. So things kind of may have drifted some. And then since then, and of course, we always have to deal with the adversary trying to mess with us and push us around a little bit and get us to do things that, maybe get a little sloppy here and there. So, and the New Testament, when it was recorded, I don't know that, today it's easy for us to put things in databases and regurgitate them out of databases, but in the early couple centuries or so of the New Testament, there was no scribes sitting around counting the letters in the lines and that kind of thing. So sometimes you wonder if that message was perfectly preserved or not. And there are people who think it was absolutely guaranteed, preserved, letter for letter, yod and tittle, etc., which is a fine thing to believe if you want. But what do you do when you run into more than one version? And we have transcripts and slices, pieces, fractions, whatever. Parts of transcripts that don't agree letter for letter. Which one's right? Well, in that case, we take as many of them as we can find, and we kind of try to come up with the most likely thing that's right, based on all kinds of things, like how old was it, and what group recorded it, and where was it stored, and whatever. So anyway, there's a lot that can be gleaned from digging around in a scripture now and then, and it's fun. It's really fun. So I recommend it. And then you share what you find with your friends, and if they think it's bogus, they'll tell you, and then you can reconsider. So let me know what you think. Travel with God.